Welcome back, guys. Finally, we're going to get started on this thing. Goal is today is to pull the motor out, but first I have to unload the car from all the stuff from Oregon. First, we have to disconnect the battery before we get started. In the back of E36s, the batteries are located in the trunk. Just need a 13 and then you can take the battery out. I forgot to mention that I'm using the stock battery tie down back there, so that's just a 10 millimeter. You just pull that bolt out and then the battery will be ready to come out. Battery tie down, that's stock. Just leave it back here so we'll have it when we put the battery back in. This baseball bat here to keep the hood propped up. I went ahead and disconnected the hood just because it is damaged already too. So just make my life easier when I have to use the hoist to pull the motor, that we're just gonna go ahead and take the hood off. Now we got all the room in the world to get this out. First thing we gotta do is take off this front bumper, which is pretty easy. Just a screwdriver. Pry that panel off. This one's already off where my tow hook was. And you need a 13 for these up here. That one off. There's technically 4, but I only have 2, so 2 holds it. To make our life a little bit easier, we'll pull these out first. Our lights, that out of the way. That one's bad anyways. And to be honest, what actually fits on the headlight bolts here is 5/16. So we'll go ahead and pull these off. The 2 bolts on each side, and then this should just go ahead and pop right off. Now the kidney grill is off. Pretty much is just left the bumper supports and the radiator support left to take off on this, and then start draining the coolant out of this thing. For some reason I can't find my my deep 10 socket, but the bolts here that go onto this black support here, they are a 10 mil. So if you have obviously an impact and a deep socket 10, it makes your life a lot easier, but I can't find mine right now because it's probably at work. So I'm gonna go ahead and take those off and then continue on here. Now, this piece is off along with the bumper shocks that are there. So now I just need to take off the 2 T27s at each corner, and the core support should just come right off. So now, radiator sits in here fine without the core support. Now pretty much I gotta put the hardware back on. Normally in places that I take stuff off and that it can go back on, I put it back on so I don't lose it, and it'll be there for when I gotta put everything back together. So we'll go ahead and put this stuff back on. I'll move most of these parts that are sitting out in front and go get my drain bucket so I can go ahead and drain the radiator out. So funny enough, I had pulled this motor out maybe like a month or 2 ago. pretty much to just like reseal the oil pan, do a rear main seal, some of the maintenance that's a little bit easier for myself, I think, to just pull the motor out completely, and then put it all back together and got it pretty much ready to go to Oregon. And unfortunately, I think we'll dive into the motor eventually once we get this thing out. But I think we ended up like damaging a valve when water got sucked up in through the intake. I mean, you guys can kind of see like the intake. Obviously I have like a little dumb, stupid cold air intake. So it came in up through the wheel well here and sucked in some water into it. Unfortunate, but at the end of the day, it is what it is. And now it's kind of pushed me to want to boost this thing a little bit more. Now that I have a reason to tear down the motor. Actually, I just got some pistons too. I traded one of my buddies a set of S52 cams for a set of turbo pistons. I do have an S52, if you guys watched my last video, on the side over there. That needs to actually go to the machine shop also because it has a small pit inside cylinder 3, I think, 3 or 4. But send that out to the machine shop with pistons and piston rings and have them do a hone and get everything squared away with that. And then that S52 will come back into the drift car for the time being until the turbo motor is built. Okay, so like I previously stated before, I don't run an idle control valve or any of that stuff on this car. So I actually run one of these intake style boots, and I just cap the one off, and then that's really it for the intake. I don't have anything else that goes on here. Now we can go ahead and reach the coolant hose that's down here, which it's this guy right here. All I gotta do is disconnect here, bring my pan back over, and then we can pull the radiator out of this thing. So we're gonna have to get into removing the manifold, which is super easy. It's just the main bolts across the top. Remove the dipstick that's connected to it out of the way, and the single plug for the IETs that's inside the manifold. After that, everything's going to be under the car. We're going to have to disconnect the drive shaft, loosen the trans mount, loosen the motor mounts, and take off the harness. So these are like the specialty tools, if you will, to take off the clutch fan, because normally you don't have to take the radiator out, but it is grooved here for 2 different sizes, and then 2 different size wrenches, so that way you can go ahead and use both to get them off. Once it's broken loose, you can just spin your fan, and it will back itself off. Now these are reverse threaded, so they do spin with the engine, so they will automatically tighten themselves on, but just like that, fan is off. Top of the valve cover here is a breather. This breather actually runs all the way around to my catch can that's in this corner. There you go, now you can see it. So it just goes to there, so if any blow-by comes by, it just gets recirculated back to that. Honestly, I haven't checked it yet since I came back from Oregon, but prior to that, I never had an issue to where I had a bunch of it going by, which obviously is good, but it's there as a just in case. So now we gotta try and pop the fuel rail off. That way we can start getting to the bolts on the manifold and then pop that off, and you guys will see how fast and easy it is once you have everything deleted underneath the manifold. So I got the fuel lines disconnected at the bottom, emptied my bucket so I could put the fuel in there. Now I just have to disconnect the intake air temperature sensor, which is at an awkward angle, but we got that. So I got the fuel lines disconnected at the bottom, emptied my bucket so I could put the fuel in there. Now I just have to disconnect the intake air temperature sensor, which is at an awkward angle, but we got that. And just double check and see if there's anything else. Which, to be honest, the smart move would be to take off the electrical for the fuel rail, so that can just sit up here, and then we can take the fuel rail and the injectors and the manifold all off together, so all the electrical stays with the harness, and this will just come off when we're not fighting that after we get the manifold off. And they will pop out of the injector themselves, so you don't have to worry about taking those out and being more time consuming. And then once those are out, plug that. And then that will be out. Now, unfortunately, we did take this off when we were at the track, and it did get rerouted the wrong way, so I'm gonna have to pop off the fuel rail anyways to get the wiring out from the backside of cylinder 6 injector. Just kind of gotta wiggle and pull, and they will pop out of the manifold. So now that that's out, I'm going to move that. And since I already disconnected the fuel lines, you can go ahead and pull this guy out from the back. So the whole fuel rail will come out like so. Let's start wiggling this guy off. Actually, forgot, like I said earlier, you do need to, it'd be smart to take off the throttle body since that is connected to the throttle cable. So we'll go ahead and pop this guy off really quickly. And then so that way we don't lose stuff, I'll take the two that I took off before and put it on the manifold. You can go ahead and take a look and see every port here. It looks relatively healthy. No issues. Obviously, cylinder 6, as you can tell, looks a lot cleaner than the rest of them just because it had washed water in, and it might have washed water in a couple other cylinders too, but this was the main one that we had actually water coming out of once we took the manifold off itself. So we know for a fact this one's going to be our problem one, but hopefully it's nothing too crazy, maybe just a bent valve or something like that from that issue. All of the wiring harness here, which I did label everything during that time when I pulled everything out. So it just makes it easier to put stuff back in, especially if you're in a hurry or trying to get this stuff knocked out. But it's really not too difficult. I could do it now without even looking, pretty much. That's how much I've worked on these things. So let's go ahead and start disconnecting most of the harness here. Okay, so almost all the harness is completely disconnected. I got one more wire here that goes to the starter, and then the one wire that goes on the back of the transmission, and the whole harness is off of the motor. What's left, I'm going to try to get the camera underneath the car too so you guys can see, but I got to disconnect the drive shaft, center support, my V-band down there, and start loosening the transmission mount and the motor mounts here, and then I have to go get my engine hoist. So we can try to lift this thing out of here. Now we're under the car. Probably should have lifted the back end of the car up to make life easier, but if you can see it, this is the drive shaft and the guibo that needs to be disconnected so we can drop the drive shaft. Also, I have my dual selector shift rod up here, so we have to disconnect that from the motor, and then we can start taking off our motor, or our trans mounts, sorry, not motor mounts. Start loosening our trans mounts and get a jack underneath the transmission to help guide us when we come out. Also, there's a little support crossbar here for stability that needs to be removed too, so we'll remove that. Remove our slave cylinder, pull that guy out and drop it down, and then we should almost be able to take the motor out, because I almost forgot. Sorry, the camera angle's pretty bad, guys, but here's my V-band for the exhaust. So we can disconnect the V-band. This will still be attached to the motor. We'll pull the motor out with. So, sorry about the camera lighting garage. Anyways, so disconnected the drive shaft and the guibo. So that's disconnected another car. 6 bolts, those are 18s. Take those off. Disconnected the shift linkage, got that done. Disconnected the slave cylinder, that's done. And disconnected the exhaust at the V-band. So all this stuff done. Oh, and I grabbed the extra plug right here off the transmission that's on the wiring harness. So that's off now too. Pretty much all that's left now is just getting the engine hoist, bringing that over, and then disconnecting the 2 front motor mounts. And then probably disconnecting the SERP belt so I can take off the power steering pump. That way we don't have to take off all that and deal with the mess that can cause, and we'll just leave that hanging in the engine bay. But making a ton of progress so far. I mean, it's only been maybe about an hour or something like that, hour and a half, and I had to take a phone call. So it really isn't that hard, guys. You just gotta get to it. Okay, now also forgot to mention, I loosened up the transmission mount too, and I have a jack underneath the transmission right now that's supporting it. The only other thing right now that's holding the motor in is the 2 motor mounts. But like I said, we are going to take the serpentine belt off so we can remove the power steering pump, so that way we can pull the motor out and leave the reservoir and the power steering pump inside the engine bay, and just pull the motor and trans right out. I still do have to disconnect that cross stabilizer bar, so I'll do that. But really quickly, since water did get into the motor, it is kind of scary. But I gotta see if the motor still rotates. So hopefully it does. I haven't tried it. And that's a fucking good sign. Heck yeah. Support brace is off now. Top of the motor mounts are off. Power steering pump is loose along with the reservoir. That cross member that was under that support cross member is a 17. Take that off, pretty easy. And now it's pretty much ready to hook the motor up to the hoist, and let's start pulling this thing out of here. Alright, so motor's out of the car. To be honest, look how clean this transmission is. I deep cleaned it like years ago, and this thing's still like super clean. But motor's out of the car. So like I said, it's really isn't that hard, guys. I mean, let me see what time it is now. It's 3 o'clock, so what time did I start? Like noon, I think, is around the time I started. So roughly like 3 hours by myself, just in my garage. And I was able to pull everything out. Probably next video, we'll get into putting this on the engine stand and starting the tear down so that way we can see like actually what's going on. But good news that we have right now is that the engine still spins freely, so we know that it's not damaged beyond repair. Make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe. If you guys have any questions or anything I can answer, please put them in the comments below and I'll do my best to answer them as quickly as I can. But thanks for watching, guys. See you later.
Just writing lines cause I feel like a champ. Heavyweight, first place, who could expect to get slapped? I'm running else, round the competition, thinking no last. I just last, take a sip, as I'm gonna sit back. Got the arm in my coffee, this with toffee is packed.